What up, friends? I don't got any. And today we're going to be reviewing the Airborne Toxic Event's newest album, Glory. This is the 7th studio album by American indie rock and post-punk revival band, the Airborne Toxic Event. After violinist and keyboardist Anna Bolbrook left the band back in 2019, I was very curious in how that would impact their sound and songwriting process, especially because she was such a huge part of their earlier records. Fortunately, though, my fears were assuaged because they came back with 2020's Hollywood Park, which I think is probably their best record yet. Because of this, I was also kind of wondering if they would be able to ride that momentum of Hollywood Park in creating another just very personal and introspective record with this new album, Glory. But unfortunately, that was not to be. Granted, Hollywood Park is a pretty high bar to clear, and I guess I really shouldn't have expected them to just totally nail it in the exact same way twice, and this album is still pretty good. However, I still have to say that it doesn't quite reach those lofty heights that Hollywood Park did. Glory is more traditional, definitely pulling from some of their earlier work being very guitar-driven, and also the Songs of God and Whiskey style of storytelling, and I guess just song structures in general. Nothing really stands out on this album because of that, but like I said, it is still pretty solid. Our Own Thunder Road starts the record off strong enough. It's seemingly a sort of tribute, at least in spirit, to Bruce Springsteen's Thunder Road. The rigid and electronic beat give the song a pretty rough vibe, however that guitar does add some warmth to it that I really appreciate. As Michael pines about wanting to write his own Thunder Road, it draws into comparison a lot of the band's earlier subject matter with basically comparing yourself to others and how that comparison can often be the theft of artistic integrity and getting joy from your work. Because of all these comparisons, you're forever chasing inspiration and not really delving deep into the emotions that you would be if you were just kind of being honest and writing things without comparing it to anybody else. The song builds well too, and I think that bombastic middle and outro really capture the lyrical topics of somebody trying to make it in a world that just didn't really treat them all that well. Hole in My Heart is definitely when the album starts delving deep into the Heartland rock influences that permeate this album pretty much from here until the end, and it especially comes through in the lyrical topics as well, with Michael basically writing a straightforward love song about finding someone to fill a hole in his heart. It's nothing crazy, but it's endearing enough, and I also like the string passage here as well, really highlighting the passion and vulnerability on display here. So you think the difference slows it down a bit, almost featuring this sort of like Jesus and Mary chain twang in the guitars. It's really lush and also pretty different for them sound-wise, and the lack of a chorus on this one also has the song structure itself feeling pretty intriguing and refreshing. It's very much a poem set to music, and I think the lyrics are the biggest indicator of that here, showcasing this almost like innocent naivete of Michael just pining after this one girl and being willing to wait for her forever. However, even in the song itself, Michael acknowledges that he fell for her over her singing, and he doesn't actually even know her all that well. It also has some irony to it as well, as Michael is describing himself being into her for this reason, while the song itself is just describing how broken she is overall. It's almost like there's this delicate tragedy at play here, and it's just unfolding as the song progresses, and that's why I come to Airborne Toxic Event. Unfortunately though, the next track, Pigg, is probably the weakest song on the album. I can appreciate it being a bit more bass-driven, but for me personally, it kinda treads too much into the Ford F-150 commercial territory. It's decently fun still, it has that sort of like arena rock banger energy to it. However, it is interesting how this song was included when the rest of the album sounds very much not this. The lyrics are also just kind of your typical fight song fare, which doesn't really do much for me. The next track, Jenny, is fine. The acoustic songs have never really been my favorite from Airborne, and this song, it doesn't convince me, but it's okay. It's fine for what it is, but to be honest, it kind of just feels like a discount Elizabeth, if we're being real here. But, I do still appreciate the vulnerability that's on display, especially in the more stripped back production and in the lyrics too. The combo of the electric and acoustic guitar also adds a bit of fullness to the track that at least is a bit different compared to some of their other acoustic tracks, so there's that too. Note to Self definitely gives the slow song cliche a bit more vitality to it though, especially in that vocal melody. It's much more engaging compared to Jenny, and the addition of the strings during the chorus, I guess if you want to call it that, really add to the emotional punch of self-loathing that this song has. That final half is just so visceral for the sound of this track on the whole, and I think it also just really adds to how broken Michael appears here. It really sells it. It's beautiful, yet tragic at the same time. It almost sounds like it comes from the Such Hot Blood album. Like, out of any ballad, this is a fucking ballad right here. It Never Happened at All is also one of the more straightforward tracks, having this sort of like local bar band sound to it. It feels pretty grounded because of this, however, it also becomes pretty boring because of this too. In a way, this track also feels kind of like the aftermath of Hollywood Park, like he just was describing this story of Hollywood Park to a friend, and then he got up on stage to perform, and because of this, I think the lyrical content is much more impactful than the instrumental. The storytelling is well done, but the sound on the whole feels bored and really undersells the narrative. The final leg of the track is pretty good as Michael's vocals swell, but unfortunately that's kind of the only notable highlight on this one. The title track Glory, on the other hand though, is a little bit better. There's a subtle drive to this one thanks to the bass and drums on here. That guitar that comes in though also gives the track a fairly chill and laid back touch. The vocals and lyrics turn into something bittersweet though as the song slowly starts describing how Michael's become numb to the connections that he once had. In a way, it almost sounds like Michael is at the bottom of the pit here, like he's just almost given up on life and relationships. The chorus of "'Cause glory is not my friend, I never win, when I try to win, I just lose it all again" sums up the feeling of both this track and the entire album pretty well. The self-doubt is just reinforced with the tragic piano on this one, however, I do think when the guitar comes in during the final third, it is a sort of indicator that Michael is trying to pick himself up and start living again. Unfortunately though, the walk ends the album and I find it to be a pretty underwhelming end. I can appreciate the somber and chill vibe that this track is going for, but in a way, that's kind of the problem because it kind of undersells everything in trying to create those somber and chill vibes. It sacrifices its presence to do this, feeling like the more underwhelming ambient moments on Dope Machines. I can see the emphasis on a feeling of emptiness that this track tries to convey, but even when the instrumentals swell a little bit, it just doesn't really make me feel much of anything. The lyrics are also pretty vague too, definitely a far cry from the really great ending tracks on pretty much every other Airborne album. It does its job as a closer, and I don't hate it per se, but I actually think the previous song summed up this album's themes better than this one did. Overall, this Airborne album was decent. Admittedly, it's actually gotten a bit more underwhelming since my first listen, but there are still some definite highlights here. The album starts off pretty strong, however, I feel like it kind of homogenizes itself too much and fizzles out past the halfway mark. The fact that it's only 9 songs long, too, makes the album feel pretty incomplete. I feel like I might be feeling this way because the previous album, Hollywood Park, divulged so much information about Michael's history, his life, and how he's feeling these days too as he looks back on everything, that there's just not really much to say anymore in comparison. I also find that the instrumental themes on this record being this sort of Heartland rock, kind of back to basics rock sound, it's less engaging and interesting compared to the sort of songs and sounds that they've experimented with in the past. Still, this album does have the classic poetic lyrics and pretty lush soundscapes that Airborne is known for. Our Own Thunder Road and So You Think You Know the Difference play into these strengths very well. However, I don't think Heartland rock as a whole actually emphasizes what the band is good at. Like I said, the album's not bad on the whole, and while it's on, it's a fairly pleasant listen, but there's not much on here that's going to keep me coming back other than a select few highlights. Because of all this, I'm feeling a strong 6 on this newest album by the Airborne Toxic Event. Of course, we do still have to talk about album covers on this show, and this album covers, it's okay, I guess. It does have this sort of like, not unsettling per se, but this sort of like downcast feeling to it, especially with the very stark contrast between the black and white imagery and the yellow that's kind of hanging over it. So I do think it does fit the lyrics on the project pretty well. However, I don't think it really fits the instrumental all that well. Heartland rock, it tends to be pretty stripped back, down to earth, and I don't really get that from this cover all that much. If anything, this cover actually reminds me more of like their kind of post-punk revival days, but it's not really doing much for me. but I can see where it kinda relates to the lyrical content. I also think that the text is kind of in a lazy position. It's not really design-oriented all that much. But anyway, those were just my thoughts on this newest album by the Airborne Toxic Event. What did you guys think? Do you think this was kind of a return to the sound that you enjoyed from the band, a bit more driven in the guitar-oriented direction? Or was this kind of underwhelming compared to how much they divulged on past records like Hollywood Park? Let me know. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and maybe you'll get some glory. And until the next one, farewell.